Hello, I'm Jeff, and welcome to Snap Talk. This is a new segment I'm trying out where we'll talk about things that may not make the podcast, whether we run out of time to really talk at length about it, or, if like today, it's a subject that really wouldn't spark much conversation between me and the guys. Also, I'm talking over some gameplay for a couple of reasons. One, you really don't want to see this ugly face, trust me. Two, it gives us a little different look if I ever get around to doing reviews, which I would probably do more on camera. And three, I really like the idea of doing Let's Plays, but I found that I'm really terrible at it. No, I'm seriously really bad at it. So this is what I have to do in order to try what I really want to do, and that is trying to converse with you guys. So, what am I going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about pro wrestling. Specifically, we're going to talk about the recent women's Money in the Bank ladder match. Now, I was going to initially do an episode on Jinder Mahal just suddenly winning the world title after just spending years as a jobber within WWE. As a matter of fact, he had maybe one win since rejoining the company last year, up until winning a six-man number one contendership match on SmackDown a couple months ago. He'll be fine. He's going to be fine. I hope this is a good reign for him, and I hope this leads to more minorities becoming WWE champion, because it seems like there's a very small percentage. There's only been like 9 out of the 50 people that have held the title. Now, thankfully, it's been something where minorities have held the title since the beginning of the company, with Pedro Morales, the 4th WWE title holder, a Puerto Rican wrestler, winning it and holding on to it for just about 3 years. So I'm not too worried about that anymore. Jinder looked good. Jinder did fine at the last pay-per-view event. I actually enjoyed that match better than their Backlash match where Jinder actually won it. We're moving on. The women's Money in the Bank match. Holy crap. Was that a bunch of nonsense. For those that aren't aware, they had a match called the Money in the Bank match where if you win, you get a contract to essentially challenge the champion whenever you want. And the men have been doing this for well over a decade now, and it's always led to some fun moments. But they haven't had a women's match yet until last week, where at the Money in the Bank pay-per-view, they had the first ever women's Money in the Bank match. And they went hard selling how historic the match would be. They went hard on selling the history of the women's division, or I guess the women's division, then the Divas division, then the now women's division again. It was essentially won by a guy. The first ever women's Money in the Bank ladder match was won by a guy. Well, actually, it was technically won by a woman. But what happened is, at the end of the match, one of the faces of the division, Becky Lynch, she was going to climb the ladder, and she was just about there when a manager for one of the heels, one of the bad guys, Carmella, went in and he tipped over the ladder, having Becky Lynch fall to the ropes. That I'm fine with, because that's just a heel manager being a heel. But then, after trying to get his client to get it back on her feet to get on the ladder, and she couldn't, he then decided to climb the ladder himself, unhook the briefcase, and then toss it down to her. Quite the historic moment there, WWE. Bravo. Or brava, I guess. You see, it's things like this that make you remember that WWE historically has had a terrible, terrible time with women's wrestling. And that's not all entirely on Vince. Some of that is on just the actions of people like the Fabulous Moolah, who, yeah, she held the belt for a long time. There's a reason for that. She held a lot of people back. As a matter of fact, there's a story about how there was supposed to be a women's tag division in the, I can't remember if it was the 70s or the 80s, and there was a plan in place leading up to how the division was going to go. She decided to have the tag teams go against the plan, and then blamed it on the tag teams for going to work for themselves, is basically how it would be described. And so there hasn't been a women's tag team division because of Moolah. Which I guess makes it a good thing that the upcoming women's tournament is called the Mae Young Classic. And then throughout the years, they've had these dumb things like bra and panties matches where you would essentially strip your opponent down to the aforementioned bra and panties. They would have whipped cream pool matches. They'd have bikini contests. And then there was the original belt was the women's championship. But because for the longest time they were called Divas, I guess they decided to create a Divas belt, which it was designed in a way where it looked like a butterfly, which ended up having the belt be called the Butterfly Belt. Now, that's not the first or the last time a belt was called something because of how it looked. I mean, the Universal Championship gets frequently called by the fans the Fruit Roll-Up Belt because of it essentially being the WWE Championship, but red. But then again, that's a belt that looks like the WWE Championship and not a butterfly. Now, thankfully, in the last year and a half, WWE seems to have gotten it finally in their head that they should be treating these people with some sort of respect, and they actually have a large group of women who actually know how to work and actually know how to fight, whereas they pretty much brought them in with little to no fighting experience. They brought them in pretty much just because they looked hot, and they hoped that they could actually train them. And a couple of them succeeded. Trish Stratus was actually one of them who came in as a fitness model. She pretty much was the eye candy. She ended up retiring as one of the best women's wrestlers ever. But it didn't necessarily lead to a positive trend for WWE. But anyways, getting back to the point. Last year and a half, they've been doing a lot of positive things. They got rid of the Divas belt. They went back to calling it the women's title, and basically was the WWE Championship, but white and specifically made for the women. And then they went and they had some amazing matches. Some of the best matches of the year in WWE were between Charlotte Flair and Sasha Banks. The first time they had a title change between the two of them was on a Raw episode where Sasha was able to take the belt from Charlotte, and it was a great match. It had a point where she got to honor one of her heroes, Eddie Guerrero, by pretending that Charlotte's buddy was about to hit her with the title, which was always fun to watch Eddie do. And of course, they had a number of other matches later on, like the SummerSlam match where Charlotte won it back, where it wasn't necessarily the cleanest, but it was interesting to watch. And then there was the match after that where Sasha won it back. And then the historic Hell in a Cell match afterwards, where it was the first ever women's Hell in a Cell, which, again, was kind of botchy, but still interesting, and was actually the main event of a pay-per-view. And then the match after that, a Falls Count Anywhere match, where, again, Sasha won it, but had one of my favorite moments of last year, where Charlotte had beaten down Sasha, and then she turned around, she taunted to the crowd, and then you look back, and Sasha was standing back up, and she had a kendo stick in her hand, and then just started wailing on Charlotte. Definitely one of my favorite moments of last year. Then they had an Iron Woman match, which was the first of its kind on the main roster. Some questionable booking there, but essentially it was still a good match. And again, these were high-quality matches that were not just historic, but also fun to watch. And then you go up until Money in the Bank, and then they were going to have another historic first ever for the women's division. And it ends like that. What? Now, the strange thing is, if this were any other year, if they weren't building this up as one of the biggest moments in women's wrestling in WWE, I would have had no problem with how it finished. But at some point, you have to realize that you're building this up in a way where you have to do it a certain way. If James Ellsworth had dragged Carmella up to the top of the ladder so that she could grab it herself, that would be one thing. And even if we're not talking about historical moments, okay, let's talk about precedent in a ladder match. Essentially, if they had let this stand, which we'll get to that in a sec, it would essentially mean you would be an idiot if you didn't have friends that didn't come down to the ring during the match to grab the belt for you and then just hand it to you. Or briefcase, whatever you're competing for. Which would make for some interesting matches, but would kind of cheapen the match in a way where it's no longer just about who can grab the belt first, but whose side can get the belt for themselves first. But it didn't stand. 2 days later on SmackDown, the match was essentially overturned by the general manager, and so they're going to have another women's Money in the Bank ladder match in just a couple days on SmackDown, a couple days from recording this. And from everything that we've heard, this was the plan. And part of this plan was because the ratings for WWE have gone down. So essentially, the first women's Money in the Bank ladder match was a publicity stunt to get people watching an episode of SmackDown. Not only does it essentially create a moment that nobody wanted, it also just screams late WCW, where they just did whatever they could to try to get eyeballs on them. It's one thing to do a finish like that for a story. It's another thing to do that for ratings. You go for the short-term ratings, you're going to have long-term problems in the end. The last thing I'm going to say about this is that I hope that Carmella wins it this coming Tuesday, because the promo she had after winning it was just absolutely on fire. And quite frankly, out of the people that they have on the roster, I think she would have the most fun with the briefcase. So hopefully they find a way to get the briefcase back on her. And hopefully this time we'll get that image that we were all hoping for in the first match of a woman standing on top of the ladder holding the briefcase of the first ever women's Money in the Bank contract. And hopefully we don't have another Santina Marella from WrestleMania 25 moment. If you don't know what that was, it was basically a guy winning a women's battle royale. Like I said, WWE doesn't have that good of a history of this. And that is it for this episode of Snap Talk. If you liked what you saw, please like, comment, subscribe, and share with others. If you have a different opinion to what was stated, feel free to comment down below and we can talk about it. If you have an idea for another Snap Talk, leave a suggestion below, and if I feel like I can get enough material together, I may talk about it in a future episode. Featured game today is the amazing indie title Cave Story. Is an action-adventure game inspired by games like Metroid and created by the developer Daisuke Amaya, better known as Pixel. Initially released in 2004 on PC, it has seen numerous ports over the years to the PSP, Wii, DSi, 3DS, Linux platforms, and just recently, the Nintendo Switch. It has even received a 3D make courtesy of Nicalis and NIS America on the 3DS. Gameplay is just right kind of challenging, and the story is wonderful. The game is not only recommended playing by my account, but the account of gamers across the world over. You can check it out on places like Steam, GOG.com, and Nintendo eShop, depending on what system you play. I'm Jeff from Some Nerdy Arguments, and I'll talk to you soon.